Hi, hello everyone. Good evening. Happy Valentine's for those who are in the north. I'm Carolina Arantes, a Brazilian photo documentary based in France and working abroad. And I will be today sharing this talk with my dear Azu Nwagbgu. We will be making a 1 hour talk ending with a Q&A questions. So please stay until the end for the posing questions and interrogating us or commenting the work. We will start showing some images that in a series that of a long-term story that calls First Generation. I will explain a little bit more about First Generation with Azu. But firstly, I would like to introduce Azu. Azu is a dear friend and curator of this work. He's the founder and director of the African Artists Institute and the Lagos Photo Festival in Nigeria. Azu has been participating in important juries like World Press Photos and Eugene Smith Grant and Forum, among others. He has recently being prized by the best curator as a best curator for the Royal Photographic Society in 2021, and he's now an explorer for National Geographic, being an ambassador for the nonprofit organization as well. I met Azu in 2016-17, I believe, in the when the work was starting. First Generation was really starting. It was a joyful moment of meeting him, for having his guidance all through this work. And let's start.
Thank you so much, Carolina. It's wonderful to be here, and good evening, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day to you all, celebrating love and happiness, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to share a very beautiful project that was born out of love, born out of community. And we'd like to share that union with you all tonight. And hopefully we'll be able to learn a little bit about the work and what it means in this present time for the 21st century. Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you, Azu. I'm in Brazil now, so just close to the street, so I hope the noise in the street noise won't bother us. I started First Generation in 2014 when I was recently arrived in France. And this work, as you said, Azu, is a very touching work for me, because I dedicated myself to this work with a lot of compassion, and I fighted for many of these stories. In the sense that when I started this work back to this 8 years ago, in France, there is no statistics. So I had to start listening to...
Sorry, can I interrupt you there? You say in France, there is no statistic. There is a rule against gathering statistics about demographics. Is that correct?
Exactly. Under the universalism law in France, we are not allowed to make a ethnic statistics. So we don't have any information about who are from each region, who from each ethnics, any ethnics, not only African origin ascendancy, but anyone. And the position they have.
The idea is to promote equality.
In the sense of being equal under law. This is very questionable, I think, in a sense that in other hands, we don't know how these communities are getting involved in France, how they are developing their professionals or health systems, or like how they are really represented and involved in society. The great matter, it was when I was starting this story, I didn't have any reference to understand how was the women living in Africa, from African ascendants, living their French citizenship, and how they were belonging to this country. How was this relationship of being involved in the history of the country? So I interviewed many, many women. And this was a very turning point for this project, because the interviews were really touching. really important to hear their stories. It was a moment that I realized how this moment for this generation is a turning point moment for them in relationship with the parents and for the children as well, and how they were consciously choosing where is French culture getting in their lives and being involved in their way of living, and how they could, until which moment they could repeat or keep the parents' or heritage. And so this when the interviews started, these stories and these meetings starting to become very intimate and friendly. So that's how I affirm that this story is really important to me, and how it gets important to in an intimate vision, but also in a public reality as well.
Can I ask about that particular, when you arrived in France, in Paris at the time, you felt a little bit like an outsider, right? Coming from Brazil. And so coming into France, you already felt sort of outside of the community. And was it this feeling of being an outsider that you found community in the first generation Africans who were now acculturated as French? Did they embrace you? Did you find more in common with them than you did integrating? Was that something that sparked the project? How did it really start? Or how did what sort of gave you the confidence to just jump into this really complex story as a Brazilian living in France at the time?
There are several layers that led me to this story. One, of course, is the fact that being an outsider, an immigrant myself, made me think about how it is to construct a history when you are immigrants. But then these women are French, so I am the immigrant one, looking for France, so I am the outsiders. And by the time when I started listening to their stories, I started realizing how my culture, my Brazilian culture is very intimate to some of their cultures as well. So definitely I have found myself much more adapted in a sense of feeling at home with African ascendancy women that many times I felt with French women. I think that there are some very important way of dealing humanly and daily lives and supporting each other that I really find inside Brazilian culture, and also the way of thinking about family and respect and heritage, and also about food. It's something that you feel like comfortable very easily when you come from Brazilian culture. We see how African we are in Brazil. And
what about the research that you had to do maybe it's a good time to start sharing the screen based on the archive, the research you had to do to sort of inform the project, the ballast, the facts that you had to establish, the research that really informed the work that you're able to produce, because this is a work of documentary photography that is really rooted in a lot of background research in the story of African migrants, first generation African migrants living in Paris. So do you want to speak a little bit about that and what you learned and how you went about the research and how the project was constructed from archival photography and somehow, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag yet, but how it just developed from a very fact-based project to something that you were able to reveal from a very personal perspective with the portraits at the end.
Okay. Kleber, do you mind starting sharing the presentation, please? So I think that this work is was definitely based on the interviews of the women. And I think that this starting point was really important because we must say that there was a kind of collaborative work. We didn't necessarily thought about it as a collaborative work, like we didn't put it out like or settle it as a collaborative work, because many times I got into this women lives, interviewing them and proposing this reflection, but they were also reaffirming with me the fact that this first generation was really in March in France. So they were the ones who were guiding me to understand and to leading me where should I go and how should I understand this reality. So one of the important things to understand is that we can see the first image of the archive images. Just the first one is clever. This picture is very, very important because it resumes the family reunification laws of 76.
Can you speak a little bit about the laws of 76, what happened and how the first generation and the paternal generation, the generation that came before them, what was the turning point that led to this new history, this new French demographic that we see in the football teams, all over our cities, in the markets in Paris, all over France, you know, the way Africans have come to establish a presence as French in society. Do you want to maybe speak a little bit about that?
At the end of the colonization, many African men from ex-colonies, French ex-colonies, came to France to work in the main structure constructions they were having in France. So all the light systems, the roads, all the infrastructure of the country were in the biggest, highest level of reforms, and the men. Many men came from ex-colonies to work, and that's how the buildings of the banlieues of the suburbs around Paris were constructed to receive these men. After 10 years in France, the French government decided to allow these men to bring the women and the family. After 10, 15 years, it's not exactly, there was not an exact date, but between 10 and 15 years. So in 76, the government assigned the law, family reunification law. I don't know if it would be exactly the same in English name, but allowing the women to arrive and to come to join their husbands. And the women, the first children born from these meetings are the first born children from African ascendancy born in France, what makes them the first Afro-French citizens, if we could call them Afro-French citizens, but under universalism, we are not allowed to call them Afro-French citizens. So we call French African citizens. And this picture is very important because we are seeing here Madame Koné, who arrived to meet her husband, and the kids that were recently arrived, some of them very young or born in France. These kids were born in France, and they are then the first generation post-immigration, African immigration in France. And the women are then the subject of the story, because as you said, the men, we have already some in our imaginary, our image of what is the French Black man in France today by movies or football or sports or hip hop. That's very important. But the women were not, like, there was a gap to understand how was women dealing with this double nationality, double identity, double culture, all this. And French is such an important reference for femininity worldwide. And I am, as a woman, and also coming from a mixed country, I was wondering how is to, in a country, to construct this mixity in the middle of the globalization time. So I started navigating to the familiar archives, because the childhood was the really important part of African culture for these women. It was really the main time where they had access to the very intimate African culture of the parents. They were going to schools where they were learning the French culture, and at home they were living under the African culture of the parents. So Kleber, if you can change for the next image, we can talk about how the schools. And this is what I found. I found amazing archive families. It was like a great surprise for myself, because this is the cover of an album of 1903. So not long time ago, they were still using this cover of this school picture 115 years ago, with all the kids very white, and the classes inside it was very mixed. So we are seeing how the French society is changing deeply. Yeah. Although it doesn't refer to itself many times as a mixed culture. No, we see always like still immigrants. They are still seeing the kids of immigrants as kids of immigrants and not part necessarily of the society. So we can go forward to the next image, Kleber. So this I found a very important document. Like this is the Aïssé Ndiaye grandmothers when she was in Senegal, when Senegal was still a French colony. So when we see this, although we start talking about intimacy, life, an intimate life of the Ndiaye family, for example, but also a country history situation. So we are mixing the public and the private all the time, when the touching histories or very intimate histories they are living on their own lives, daily lives, are part of evolvement of this society. And what is quite positive in a sense, because these women are, if we can change for the next one, please, Kleber, these women are like moving to construct and fix this double identity. Well, they are trying to figure out how. And, the next generation will be.
And Carolina, what's important in this sort of image is that you can see that they don't have a reference as they construct their identity. So it's if the next generation coming after them have a visual reference for what it is like to be French and to be Black and to be African, because they've seen they've understood the culture of the food. There isn't as much dissonance. It's been sort of massaged into society, into the environment. But for them, they're dressed on the left image, as they would dress in Dakar, in Senegal, or in Mali. On the right, the same clothes, but you can see in the different clothing that the kids are wearing and the parents are wearing in the image to your right, how there is a shift in identity or in the presentation of identity through fashion in the way the kids are presented. And that's why this project becomes really important, that we begin to understand the construction of identity, the construction of image in visual culture, and the role that plays in creating destigmatizing, that's the word, destigmatizing the idea of being a migrant or being a French citizen or being French and Black in society.
Yes, these images are very interesting, because on the left we have Bailly, on the girl, the woman with, well, here she was a girl here with the baby in the hands in her village in Mali. In the right, she's with her kids in Paris in the 13th announcement. So this stigmatization comes from a place that there is no reference, as you mentioned, because United Kingdom created the Commonwealth with the other ancient colonies, and United States, both are important reference, had a a relationship, a direct relationship with slavery. That is not the case with France metropole. So when I choose the women, and this is very important to mention, because of this stigmatization, I opened the story to different origins women's, like women's whose parents came from Senegal, Mali, Mauritania, Ivory Coast, Congo, so West Africa, and also Central Africa, East Africa, and also West and Central Africa. For us, exactly to show that in France now, we are having a melting pot of ascendance, African ascendancy in France.
Yeah.
But to avoid people to have this point of view of immigration still, and not seeing them as an African people in France, but as French citizens.
Excuse me.
No
Maybe
problem.
the next slide.
Yeah, next is. So here, well, just to confirm, like the difference, like here, the grandmother, we just saw the identity with her nephew in her house in Mali, and then the family together in the suburbs in Paris, and then I see on vacations with her friend, her best friend of the time, and now in France. So there is a very cultural turn point that is really happening in these cultures, and there is a lot of melancholy, in a sense of losing the parents and the ancestors' culture. There's a lot of melancholy overall because of the lack of the language. Many of these women are not learning the languages of the parents. And also a kind of process of getting involved in a society that they don't feel they belong to, although they are living there. You know, we can move to the next photo. So this picture I included here because we can see this shift. Like when Fatoumata, that was the baby on the first image we saw, she's now the Green Party councillor of the mayor in Paris. She's an important woman, like deciding the laws that the municipalities is the voting weekly. And her father has the same mayor card when he was a gabalit collector, when he arrived in France. So we are seeing that this post-immigration is having a representation, an important representation, and are being part of the society somehow. So there is no way back to the past, let's say that. No, there is a new French society today, and this mixed is still for them a very hard position, because they have every day to answer the questions, where are you from? This is the main questions that they are posing, why the people are questioning them where they are from, when they are from France. And they feel not French in France, but they don't feel as African as they could feel at their parents' origin. So the construction...
in your opinion, based on the research that you've done and the interviews and the process of making First Generation, there's a dissonance that you talk about, the dissonance of identity, where the First Generation sort of feel like they're oscillating between being their African roots, whether it's Mali or Dakar or Cameroon, and feeling French. And then the law, the law in France that resists collecting statistics about demographics and identity and that sort of thing. Do you find that sort of there's a positive aspect to that, or is it something that you feel hides the truth, or is there a way that allows for a better acculturation of these migrants, the First Generation migrants? Do you feel like it's the fact that the resistance towards collecting the data around demographics in that sense, like in the UK that it's done, in America they're obsessed with statistics, and they always break everything down to race and gender and all of these sort of identity, reductionist identity positions. Do you think that sort of the French have a more progressive approach with their reluctance to collect this sort of data?
This is a very complex question, and I think many points of trying to understand this. But I think that in a sense is a positive way if we see how these women are dealing and fighting for the place. I think that it's very positive to see how they
This is a positive story. Fatimata Kone, the daughter of a migrant who was a janitor, who has risen to a very important position where she can influence, and she can be she can influence, be of positive influence, as someone that is a reference that can be a good example for the younger generation and can be themselves in a different role and can aspire to other positions, other sorts of jobs, because this, if you can't see it, it's hard to imagine it. So in a way, that's a really positive story. And I think that's why the book First Generation is really important, because the question I asked you is impossible for you to answer because it's a very complex question and no one has all the answers. And I suppose that's what we explore in First Generation, the way it's ordered, from archive to documentary to portraits and to more deeper documentary that plays with the inside and outside space, public space, and then in the end we have the portraits and the interior spaces. So maybe we can move on to the next slide, because I see that we're keeping the time, but it's good.
Coming back to your question, so I think that this is a very positive point. If we think about individuals, it's a very positive story for these women, individuals, movements. They are really acquiring a place and fighting and doing well. And but I think that in French society there is a lot to be done, a lot to question and to evolve in these reflections about integration and also representation. I think that there is still a lot of difficulties when these women go to United States and they feel French outside the country, and they can answer as a French woman, but they cannot feel that way in the country they were born. There is a real important problem, when reading. I didn't include the interviews in our presentation, but the book that has been recently launched by Fisheye has several interviews, and parts of the interviews we are working on with the girls. And these interviews are showing exactly how they are breaking these difficulties to get in it. And there's a lot of work to get in it. So it's all the merit. It's a merit. It's an individual merit. It's not a social evolvement in these reflections. I don't think so. Although it is going on, because everybody's talking about this after Black Lives Matter, but there's still a lot to do.
Maybe the next slide. Because I want us to get through as much as we can so that we can allow those who are celebrating Valentine's to ask questions, because I'm sure lots of people would be keen to ask you about this work. And please drop in your question in the chat box, or in the Q&A rather, and we'll be able to read it and answer it as best we can after the presentation. One of the things, the big controversy today, Carolina, is we have you talk about post-Black Lives Matter, we have a hypervigilance today about who has the right to make what work. And there's the idea today that we need to allow communities to tell their own stories, and you're coming from Brazil as a Caucasian woman, and what gives you the permission to tell this story? And how have you navigated this process? I mean, I say this because we worked on this book together, and I think it's really important that we shift the narrative around authorship towards the community. But how have you navigated this process, and what are your ideas, and what would you like to say about this before I react, because I think you have a clear position?
I think, Azu, this is maybe the most important question of all the main work, because I've passed all the work questioning and re-questioning how to positionate myself during this work. I started this work before the Black Lives Matter arrived, and all discussions about Afrofeminism and identity in France were already done, of course, and there were a lot of things being done by the community, the women, Afro-French women in France. And I was wondering, how should I act on this when I listened to the interviews, and I said that as a white woman, Latin white woman, even coming from a mixed country, how could I speak about racism or some violences or some racial issues without having any suffering, any of this, or on the contrary, living a social privilege? And the fact of including the women in creating I really realized very soon that their voices was really important, that they had to be there, present and speaking by themselves. And the way I did it, it was observing visually what could be respectful and what they should be feeling in the sense of ambiguity, of not belonging. I had to be very respectful to that. That was the documentary part I could empathize and really speak about. But the daily life, we should listening to them directly. I didn't avoid it. Many times I thought if I was able to talk about this story, if I should be the one who talk about this story. But many of the girls got into me like, yes, you have to do, it's important. You are Brazilian, so you can talk about it. And the fact of having a very important African culture in my country, where we cannot deny we have an important identity, African identity in Brazil, although we deny it still, and in the country. So many times I was questioned by myself. I was questioning myself on how to construct this story, and definitely the collaboration was an important issue for me. I could not make this work as a final word. That was the main thing for me. I didn't want to take this story as my final word about this. Firstly, because there is no final word, there is no final answer about this, because this is a transition in French society, but also because there is a lot of interrogation these women are making, that I am just the listener. And so I feel this work as a collaborative work. And when we were launching the book, this was very beautiful for me, and I believe for the girls as well, because during the launching, many people were asking to sign the book together. And that's where I realized that the work we have done together, where their guidance was so important, they were guiding me to these stories, and their voices inside were really an object or on a work that is working to collaborate to discussions and representation. This was really important for me, and without collaboration, it was not possible.
In the sense, what I'm hearing is that you are just a vessel. You're just a messenger. What you were doing was merely creating a space for your collaborators, for the women that you've been working with, you've been interviewing, and you've been interacting with, and eating with, and living with, and spending time with. And I think that's something that is lost in the new auditing of the art world and the photo world, where we demand a certain kind of righteousness from artists and photographers and makers. I think that we lose the fact that sometimes and oftentimes the best work is actually cleverer and more important than the artist. You know, the work itself lives beyond the artist or the photographer. It's a document that is, or it's an artifact that will transcend, or that ought to transcend, the personality that is channeling it. And that's something that is lost in the new wave that I think is important, that we give, of course, communities the power to tell their own story. But I do not support this notion that we should bar people and we should censure people from others from engaging and creating incredible work together. I can think of some of the most important work that have illuminated my ideas about even my own community based on the work of others, you know, who spot it. Even in your own home, someone will come into your house and say, hey, did you notice that? And you've been seeing it every day in your home, but you never really made an impact in your living room or something. And so it's really important that we understand that, for me, is the work made with respect? Is it made with empathy? Is it made with compassion and an understanding of the community? Is the artist overshadowing the work, or is the work able to rise above the personalities that are making it? These are some of the more important questions, because when you censure work because of a reductionist, lazy audit, if you like, or assessment based on race or gender, or if you're a farmer, are you gonna, can you make work about a farmer? Or if you're a teacher, how dare you make work about I don't know, dentist or whatever? I think it's really a problematic situation where we begin to demand that we don't open up the conversation.
I agree with you. And I agree with you, and I add the fact that today, as photographers and documentary photographers, if we are aiming to support a change, a social change, a reflection about human rights or minorities, we have to understand the powerful language of images. And sometimes, instead of imposing your own dialogue, you have on your own world, if you are normally a northern white person, or if you are a majority against minorities, you have to consider that the system of the system that is structured in telling histories were from the north, from the south to the south. And how can we collaborate to get inclusion through imagery, through getting into the discussions? And this work, for example, the documentary part, the research part, sometimes in the text parts, I feel that they are so important as the images, many times much more important than the images.
Yeah, because the text is mostly written on the voice of the women that you've interviewed in the community, and that's a very big part of the work. So if people censure the work, they censure them. And because of time, I think it's important that we quickly go towards the portraits, because that is another beautiful collaborative project, part of the project that is really, for me, the golden point for this particular project. So maybe we can speed up towards the end, towards the portraits. Again, please, if you have any questions, write them in the Q&A, and we will respond.
Questions are not yet opened.
Oh, okay. Just know that they should just write them in there, and so when we end, we can address them. So can you maybe talk us through this beautiful portrait of I forget her name now, but maybe you can talk us through this beautiful portrait, and then we walk through the rest of the portraits, and then we open up the conversation.
At the end of the documentary work, and maybe we can pass through the documentary work later on, the images, I realized that the documentary was reflecting this feeling of not belonging. this floating identity.
Maybe we should go back to the documentary then, so that you can talk through that floating identity, the absence of.
We can stay in this page, for example, and then we can go to.
Yeah, that's great.
We see that there is a lot of different religions, and they are melting in between religions and melting between the first generation, the immigrant generation, the Malian community kept inside the Malian community, the Senegalese, but this first generation are having a melting pot of African ascendancy. So this was a way of showing that there is no way of catching it. It's all under construction. They feel like floating. So the portraits came to show that inside this floating environment they feel, there are some women's and different identities, of course, that they are posing themselves in a strong way to construct their places. And this series of portraits, and now we can go to the portrait series, please, Kleber. We can see how these identities, you can make like a slideshow. We can feel the difference and the presence of these women that are very, very positioned in relationship of themselves. This is Fatoumata in the mayor house, where she has her own chair there inside. But when you listen to Fatoumata, you see how hard it is for her to construct, to find getting up and getting alone in middle of the others, getting the only Black woman in middle of the students in university, and how is to fight and to double her strength to position herself with situations that normally are not questioned for white women or white people. So we have the several origins and religions, women that are really, really getting very strongly present in France. And the next generation.
I think the great thing about these portraits, Carolina, is the objects that are around the subjects or your collaborators. So, the gym gear, the artwork, the contemporary images on the walls, all of these sort of create a kind of critical design aesthetic that augment the idea of the image itself and construct another meaning as we look at the image. So that's a really big part of, constructing this idea of Blackness in France in the 21st century, which has never been seen in the way you presented it, especially through the journey from the archive. We are getting to the 42nd minute mark, and I think soon we need to start taking some questions. We have Chris Booth with the question. Are you ready, Carolina, to answer some?
Yes, of course.
Shall we dive in? Because I think it relates a lot to the images that we're looking at right now. Can I read out the question?
So can you say a bit about the process of researching and selecting the archive photographers? Did you ask women participating to select and bring you meaningful photographs? Did you ask to see their albums and you went through them looking for resonant pictures? Who choose them? So Chris, thank you for participating with us. And the process of researching was a collective work as well. We settled in the beds and opened the family albums, and they were showing it. It was a very intimate, because they were telling how was it for them this moment with the auntie, or when they came to Africa for the first time, when they were teenagers. And then through the images they were selecting to me and showing that they were that were meaningful for their lives, I was selecting those who were more some more meaningful for the stories, that sometimes they were not looking at it on a historic point of view, an external point of view, and also an intimate point of view. So we were grouping together these images. Sometimes I was choosing those, and sometimes they were saying to me, this means a lot to me, this was an important time for me. And
so it was a collaborative process of selecting the images, so you constructed the identity together. It wasn't just you selecting the archives. You and your collaborators decided on what the archival images would be.
Yes, for many families that was like that. And like for some families, they gave me all the albums and said you can choose whatever you want and you feel too. And because of the intimacy we had already, some of them they were choosing and signing this picture you can show, this you have to flute. There is a beautiful wedding portraits from Mali that the girl asked me to flute the faces because the parents were not yet Muslims. So it was a total constructive part of the story. Of course, I had to choose many of the images with the historic side. But like, for example, the picnic image, we can come back for the picnic image, like if in the documentary.
I think that's the first image in the documentary section.
Yes, and what was on, there is the first, it's not exactly a picnic, but there is in the sequence, right. The fourth image is it's a picnic image. Well, she's in the park with the kids and they had no access, like all this park vacations, picnic images, like there is a picnic archive images as well, where they are trying to figure out ways of getting a European way of living, because the parents doesn't have any culture of or it's not from their culture to make picnics or vacations or trips. And following this sense, I choose the archives as well. The archives were complementing what was the search for the Occidental, let's say Occidental culture of way of living. Because
Thank
this,
you, Carolina. And that's I hope, Chris, you got the answer that from Carolina. If you need more information, please write us in the box.
Is there any other question? Maybe we can go through the documentary part until another question come about. Because then we can talk a little bit about this not like on how constructing this feeling of non-belonging, you know.
Chris is happy with your response. Thank you. Any other questions? I'm looking at us rounding off in a few more minutes, 3 minutes. 5 more minutes to round up. So please shoot in your question in the Q&A and then we can respond.
Yeah, you can go to on the slide.
Let's do a quick slide through. That's a nice photo for today, Valentine's Day.
Okay.
And also, can we show the back and the cover of the book?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Maybe Carolina, you can say a little bit about where we can, the collaboration, how the book was constructed and how it was designed, and where we can find the book.
Azu, the book was constructed and published recently by Fisheye. I got crowdfunding with Polka magazine and Kickstarter, and the book was designed several times until we have the final edit and design by Fisheye magazine. And the Fisheye, they were like, we were searching for a family album, because we understood that this is a collaborative work. So one image of the documentary could be such an imposition of a resume of these stories by myself. So we decided to think about it as an album. And also the fact that the work is full of information on texts as well, and there is a map about the work. So we had the work like the book is now sold out in a signed copy for the moment online, and it's selling on the Fisheye magazine bookshop online. And it's a very surprised and happy news about this story that we are feeling it's spreading out very fast.
Well, thank you. I think that's a good place to end the conversation. If there are no other questions, if there aren't any other questions, We look forward to seeing you all at Photo London in a few. And Carolina's book will be there, and she'll be happy to sign a few more copies. I enjoyed thoroughly working with Carolina on First Generation, editing the book and sequencing it. And it's been a real pleasure to have you all with us tonight on Valentine's Day. Have a good evening and
It's a
speak to you all
pleasure.
soon.
It's
Thank you,
important
London.
to
Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you, Azu. The conversation will be online at Photo London Web and Facebook web page as well. So do not hesitate to write us if you have any other questions later.
Thank you all, and have a good evening.
You too.